Welcome to Techzine TV.
Hi, and welcome to this new episode of the Techzine TV podcast. I'm at Wizdom, aptly named because obviously the company is Wiz, in London this week, and I'm here with Amitai Cohen.
Hi.
Hi, you're responsible for threat research
at Wiz,
yes.
Right?
Well, that's good. I got that right. That's nice. And I thought we were going to primarily talk about cloud security, obviously, because that's where Wiz comes from.
That's our focus, yeah.
So, I moderated a roundtable earlier this year, and the consensus at the table then was that cloud security actually is, so every security nowadays is cloud security.
I guess that could be true, yes.
Could be true. So in what sense is that true according to you?
I think because cloud is highly integrated into everything that organizations are doing these days, there are very few big organizations that aren't using the cloud in some shape or form. The cloud as a term isn't necessarily well defined. I mean, cloud could mean SaaS, cloud could mean using one of the hyperscalers, and I think attackers are either trying to gain access through the cloud because the cloud has vulnerabilities or misconfigurations and it might be an easier access point than gaining access through on-prem, or the access might be through on-prem, but the interesting stuff is in the cloud.
Yeah.
So either way, cloud plays a part.
Yeah, but it's also, obviously there's cloud security, but it's also using the cloud for security.
Yes,
so running
that's true.
things in the cloud to actually secure also on-prem stuff. Right?
Exactly, yes.
So there's lots of angles to this.
Cloud is everything.
Cloud is everywhere.
Yeah.
That's
and you have threat actors that are also using the cloud,
Yeah.
right? Like they might be hosting their malware there or whatever.
So specifically, what are your threat research, obviously, but what do you specifically do on a day-to-day basis?
So my team specifically within the larger threat research group is in charge of what we call the Threat Intel Center within Wiz, which is like a hub where customers can visit to learn what's going on in the world in terms of cybersecurity, how Wiz can defend them against each of these new threats. We're also in charge of a lot of the content within Wiz, the detection rules, the prevention rules. We do a lot of research ourselves into what mistakes customers might be making when they configure things, how new services might be vulnerable to attackers' exploits.
So that's an interesting one, right? So misconfigurations by customers, because that's still one of the biggest, especially in the cloud.
Yes.
It's one of the biggest issues that we run into on a daily basis, I would imagine, right? So what are the specific, if there is a list you can make, what are the specific misconfigurations that you encounter the most?
So some of them are becoming slowly a thing of the past, like you have IMDS v1 versus IMDS v2 in Amazon. IMDS v2 is much more secure, but they support IMDS v1 for legacy reasons. Slowly, customers are sort of switching to IMDS v2, but it's not the default. And that is sort of the story with a lot of these misconfigurations where in order to support legacy, in order to support all sorts of different scenarios, vendors sort of choose to allow these things to be deployed insecurely, thinking that the onus is on the customer to secure these things.
Is that analogous with what we had in wireless, for example, when you had the web on WPA2 and now WPA3, and or with TLS following up on in the sort of website space? Is that sort of, are those analogies that you can draw?
Yeah, I think so. I think the fact that there were many websites that continue to support insecure protocols just so they can reach a wider audience and support audiences that hadn't upgraded yet, that causes a bit of a problem. Similarly, the fact that to install Windows 11, you needed to have, I think, TPM.
That was an interesting one.
Yeah, so that's sort of the point where Microsoft is saying, like, we're not going to let you be insecure anymore.
Which is good, I think, to a certain extent.
It's good, but it causes friction, for sure.
Yeah, because on the other hand, I remember this, I don't want you to go into what they did or what they didn't do, but this reminds me of when there was this SMB thing about 5-6 years ago, where Microsoft actually rolled out patches for XP because a lot of people still used XP.
Yes.
And you could argue why would you do that, right? Because when will they learn? How will they learn if you do that, right?
That's kind of like a damn if you do, damn if you don't situation.
Yeah.
Like if they hadn't released the patches, then people will get mad at them. If they do release the patches, it's like, why are you still supporting this? It's just encouraging them to continue to use this old software.
Because it's not only you can call these things user misconfiguration, but there's the responsibility is also on other parties in that chain, right? So it's quite a delicate kind of discussion.
For sure.
I think.
I mean, we're seeing something similar now with supply chain security, where if you compare, let's say, the security features being used by the big package registries like npm, PyPI. So you can see that each of them have sort of chosen a different security posture. Some of them feel more responsible to make sure that their customers are doing things securely, others don't. And as a result of this, a lot of the big attacks were against npm over the past year, just because they happened to choose a less secure posture. They left the security to be on the responsibility side of the consumer.
Yeah. And what's the responsibility of the consumer in that sense? Do they need to ask questions from their suppliers to actually sort of?
Well, there are two senses here, because they have two types of customers, right? They have the customers that are creating the packages and uploading them to npm. Those need to make sure that they're using attestation, to make sure that they're actually using MFA when they log in, things like that. And you also have the consumer side, people who are downloading npm packages, and each of those relationships can have different sort of constraints that you could apply as a vendor, but they chose not to until now. And as a result, a lot of the supply chain attacks that were going on now, they've sort of changed gears a bit, and they are becoming a bit more opinionated about how they secure things. The same goes for GitHub with GitHub Actions, for example, which for
personally, I love opinionation.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. Actually, when I talked to one of your colleagues, I mentioned this as well. I think opinionation is extremely important for companies to make sure that their customers are secure.
Yeah.
And I think that hasn't been stressed enough. Maybe, especially not in the open source world, obviously, but that's a completely different kettle of fish. If you want to go into that discussion, because that's obviously. What do you see in that relation, when you see open source on the one hand with people building a lot of stuff, and the threats associated with that?
So I think what we've seen is that defaults are incredibly powerful. So most deployments of a given software, when we check what is actually being configured, it's always like 80% keep the default configuration and only 20% customize it. So when you set the defaults as a vendor, you are taking, you have all the power to be able to make sure that people are doing things securely. That's true for open source. It's true for vendors. I think.
But it's hard. With open source, it's hard, right? Because there is not.
You have to fit a very, very wide.
It's not necessarily a vendor there.
Yeah.
There are lots of people contributing, and and then you get into who's responsible for actually the security of that code and all that stuff.
And it's very. I mean, you have the recent arguments about where does the responsibility of an open source maintainer actually begin and end when it comes to maintaining vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
A lot of these people are volunteers doing things for free. Should we expect them to fix everything that comes their way and drop everything and not go to dinner with their kids because they have a vulnerability for like their hobby project?
Yeah, and that was an interesting one, because I think the EU was drawing up some legislation for that, right? And they made the actual upstream contributor responsible in one of the first drafts for the security of the code, which is not how open source works. That's just completely crazy.
It's really difficult, I think, to find the right way to do things there. Yeah. I think we as Wiz sort of feel that we're in a position to sort of mediate between the open source vendors, quote unquote, and their consumers in order to at least help them gain visibility into cases where they're deploying this open source software insecurely, whether it's due to defaults or whether not, and help them actually change the defaults into something that is more secure.
So let's go back to the beginning when I asked you about what are the misconfigurations that you encounter. You were talking about Amazon, the sort of V1, the V2. That's sort of solving itself more or less nowadays. What are some of the things that you still really see? Look, these need more attention. So listeners and people who are watching this, what are the first things that they should sort of configure right, in the cloud?
So I think a lot of things are becoming not necessarily rarer, but a bit more trivial to identify and fix, like public S3 buckets, things like that, which we still see a lot of, but I feel like that's kind of old news.
I've been covering that for about 10 years.
Yeah, and it's still a thing. It's still a thing.
Yeah.
But we do have solutions for these things. There are many open source solutions as well. I mean, even if you're just one person with a bucket, there are a lot of tools you can use out there to make sure that you're doing things properly. I think a lot of our focus recently has been on areas that are getting a bit less attention, which are application misconfigurations at either the SaaS or the self-hosted level. We've seen that a lot with AI, where a lot of this tooling that's coming out, like Llama and Langflow and all of these things, they're sort of built for the lab. And if you read the docs, there's a big call out at the start. Don't expose this to the internet. Don't use this in production environment. It isn't built for that. But people do, because a lot of the people deploying now aren't necessarily developers. They're AI scientists. You have a lot of vibe coding projects where the people doing the deployment are like HR departments and things like that, and that causes misconfigurations to propagate.
It's always a hard challenge when it comes to security, right? Because you're always second in.
Yeah.
Right. So first you have an innovation, like vibe coding, and then look, maybe we should think about some security or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you get into that kind of argument. That must be that keeps you in a job, because obviously new technology means new threats, so that's good, but to a certain extent. But it is a very hard, especially with how fast things are going now. It's very hard to keep up, I would imagine.
I think so, but I think on the other hand, the fact that it's fast means that we do have the opportunity now, because everybody's talking about these things, to sort of educate and do the research and help people figure out how to do this correctly, shine a light on the problems as soon as they emerge. I feel like we have both the justification and the opportunity to sort of invest time in this work, and we feel that it benefits also our customers and everybody else using the software. We're doing a lot of research into both figuring out how prevalent these things are. We put out a report every year that sort of ranks the different AI toolings of both open source and self-hosted and managed to sort of see, so customers can sort of see if they're using things that are more popular, less popular, how those things are configured.
I do think that there is a very interesting opportunity now, because recently it dawned on me that securing AI is more or less the same as securing containers and all that microservices stuff, right? Because obviously they're built out of that, on top of that usually. True. Not only that, but also the way they interact and the way these things live for a very short while, and if they communicate via MCP servers and they do A2A, all that stuff, that really is a very close copy of how Kubernetes and containers and all these things work, right? So. Yeah.
We sort of, when we started exploring this space, I think a year or two ago, what we noticed that a lot of the vulnerabilities we were finding were just traditional vulnerabilities. There was nothing unique to AI in that sense. No. It was just the same old identity things, network things. Yeah. Even like you have now vulnerabilities in models, but these are things that have always existed. It's just the scale has now become immense. The people who are handling these things are doing them for different purposes. Yeah. There are a lot more of them, and they're getting a lot more permissions, whereas in the past they might not have, because they're so successful.
Does setting up MCP servers as a company, or maybe if you want to start using AI, does that help in terms of making it easier to protect? So if you have a single throat to choke, or is there something to that, or is that more depending on how you look at it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that before. I do think that it doesn't eliminate the risk entirely, because MCP servers themselves can have vulnerabilities and can have misconfigurations.
But you only have to secure those, right? And not necessarily everything on the...
I think there's definitely something to be said for centralization and making sure that things are going through bottlenecks to make it easier to secure. I think there's a lot of governance work that needs to be done. Like the fact that...
boring, but yeah.
Yeah, but I talk to even security at Wiz, and it kind of amazes me that the fact that like people in many organizations, because of the advent of AI, you can just install whatever extension you want, the latest thing in the news, and everybody ends up using it. Like we see adoption, go wildly up. For like 80% of our customers are using a given extension at any given time, just because it's becoming so popular. And it's kind of the Wild West.
Yeah, and what I also see, looking at it from a relative sidelines, is that a lot of AI nowadays is still very much focused on consumers, and not necessarily on enterprise use. And if you look at the large language models, but also all the other pieces of the puzzle. And I think that's also, if you want to deploy AI yourself as a company, that's also one of the things you need to sort of take into account.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff is sort of not enterprise grade.
No, and that's an issue, especially from a governance perspective, auditability, all that stuff, compliance, and that's one of the things that I feel is not getting enough attention at the moment. But
yeah, and I think governments are sort of trying to try to make things a bit more structured. Like you had CISA's AI S-bomb, I think it was called, or AI bomb, like a year ago. And that was interesting.
That sounds dangerous, AI bombs. But
yeah.
I know what an S bomb is, but an AI bomb is a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I sort of go.
But that I think was interesting because the idea was to basically say like, we need some sort of responsibility here for the people designing these things to be able to both claim and prove their claims about how they're building these things, so that in theory, if you are a consumer of something that is not enterprise ready or not government ready, you either need to have very, very good assurances about how this thing is built in terms of supply chain, or be able to take a recipe for this thing and build it yourself in a lab environment to make sure that it's not like contaminated.
Yeah.
And I do think those things are important, and they're probably going to become more and more the norm.
So wrapping up, what's the sort of one thing that you're looking at the moment as something like, look, this is really top of mind for me now and for my team?
So I think what we're sort of trying to do is build frameworks for how we think about the world in terms of how AI is changing attack surface. One way we're looking at it is how are attackers using AI for their own, like they're expanding the way they do phishing campaigns because now they can generate the phishing emails.
Yeah, but that's just more of the same thing,
exactly.
Right? But is it also getting more intelligent?
Exactly. And I think that's the key question. Is like, is this just attackers are using AI so they're doing it at a higher scale, so the existing defense tooling will just continue to work, we just have to make sure that it works properly? Or is this actually creating brand new attack surface? And if it is, then how broad is that attack surface? So like my favorite example recently has been where the recent one of the recent NPM attacks, Singularity, had basically part of its malware payload was abusing AI CLIs on the laptop of the developer, which I found amazing because that's basically brand new attack surface. It didn't exist a year ago.
Yeah, and you can obviously if you can pretend to be a developer through CLI, you can do a lot of damage.
And we don't have like rules for any of this stuff. Like I keep thinking about the fact that prompts are basically just sentences, and we don't necessarily have rules for this piece of malware has a sentence that says collect all the secrets from the machine.
But obviously there is a connection between the sentence and the CLI underneath or whatever. Something happens, right? It's not magic. So
it's not magic. That's true. But it does mean that we kind of have to, like, it shifts the detection to just as it happens instead of analyzing the malware and figuring out what it does. Which I find fascinating, and I think it's not necessarily widespread. It's not like all attackers are doing this all the time. It's not like you need to be afraid of the fact that you're using AI on your machine, but it is interesting.
And it does mean that catching things in runtime becomes even more important, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's all right. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Techzine TV, the channel about enterprise technology that brings you IT insights and analyses from events all around the globe. We cover everything, everywhere. Visit techzine.eu for more written in-depth articles and analysis, or keep watching Techzine.tv. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share your favorite videos with your colleagues. We'll see you soon.